Hello and welcome back to revise GCSEhistory.co.uk. This is video 3 in the topic Law and Order in the West, and in this video today we're going to be looking at a specific conflict which was the Johnson County War, and this took place in 1892, and it was a specific range war, and the war was between the cattle barons. And when we say cattle barons, we mean large ranchers, large-scale ranchers who owned lots of cattle and had very big herds, because 1892 is obviously after the cowboy age. So it's a conflict between the cattle barons and the homesteaders. And the homesteaders are small ranchers living and owning land on the plains. So that's what the conflict's between, and it took place in 1892. So cattle barons versus the homesteaders. This is the Johnson County War. So the Johnson County War of 1892. Johnson County in Wyoming, which is a US state, was settled by cattle barons in the 1870s. Cattle barons were men who ran large-scale ranches. So settled by these cattle barons. The cattle barons became very powerful in the state of Wyoming and joined together in the Wyoming Stock Growers Association. The Wyoming Stock Growers Association. You need to know that. The governor of Wyoming was also part of the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, along with other important individuals in the state. So the Wyoming Stock Growers Association had quite a lot of influence, and the purpose of this association was to protect the interests of its powerful members, and by the 1880s, 3 threats to the cattle barons had developed. So what were these 3 threats that had developed? Well, the first was that beef prices were falling. So the extreme winters of 1886 and 1887 had damaged income from ranching cattle. So herd sizes were greatly reduced because lots of cattle died during these harsh winters, and the price of beef was falling also due to a change in tastes. People were preferring more expensive meat such as lamb rather than cheap and nasty beef. The second threat was that homesteaders were settling in Wyoming, and this led to disputes over land ownership. Homesteaders were settling on land which the cattle barons claimed was their land. Let's just explain this final point here. So homesteaders actually owned their land. They bought it, or they were given it free or very cheaply due to government acts. But the cattle barons didn't own their land, they just claimed it. So obviously this could lead to disputes, because cattle barons didn't own all their land, they just claimed the land. Homesteaders could then go and buy the land, because in the eyes of the US government the land hadn't already been bought, and this led to many disputes over land. Cattle rustling was also becoming a problem. We said in an earlier video that rustling is just stealing cattle. A rustler is somebody who steals cattle. So rustling was becoming a problem. The cattle barons lost cattle to rustlers, and they blame the homesteaders for this. Whether the homesteaders were rustling or not, we don't know. And it was difficult to get juries to convict people accused of rustling. So it's difficult to get juries to convict people. So the cattle barons decided to take the law into their own hands. It was difficult because people said that if you found a motherless calf, you could steal it. If you just found a motherless calf, you're entitled to take it. But obviously, that sort of loophole in law led people to think, oh, that calf might be motherless, let's just take it. But then people might accuse them of rustling if it's not motherless and stuff like that. So basically, like, silly values and attitudes led people not being able to convict rustlers of rustling, and people falsely blaming people of rustling, and all sorts of things like that. So let's have a look at the first killings as a result of the cattle barons taking law into their own hands. So Jim Averill, who was the owner of a small store and saloon, and his partner, Ella Watson, they lived together, Jim Averill and Ella Watson was a prostitute, were living on land that one of the cattle barons claimed was their land. So, in 1889, Jim Averill and Ella Watson were lynched outside their cabin. Nobody was prosecuted for the lynching, but the cattle barons were widely known to be responsible. The cattle barons claimed that Jim Averill and Ella Watson were rustlers, and today we understand that Ella Watson, the prostitute, was said to accept cattle as payment for her services, and then she was accused of rustling. So she was sort of tricked into doing this. One of the cattle barons paid her in cattle for her services as a prostitute, and then the other cattle barons accused her of rustling and lynched her outside a cabin. And these two were living on land that one of the cattle barons claimed was their land. And they were lynched outside their cabin, as you can see from this picture here. Here's Jim Averill, here's Ella Watson. So they were the first two to be killed as a result of the cattle barons taking law into their own hands. So then, what happened next? In 1892, the cattle barons planned an invasion of Johnson County. So, the acting governor of Wyoming knew about it and even supplied the cattle barons with guns. So it had the support of local government. Support of local government. This just shows how important the cattle barons were in Wyoming in the 1880s and 1890s. A death list of names was drawn up and gunfighters were recruited. The gunfighters and cattlemen made up an invasion force of about 50 men. So the invaders were brought to Wyoming on a special train provided by the Union Pacific Railroad Company. That's shown again that this invasion has the support of many people if the railroad company are putting on a special train for it. And the plan was to capture the town of Buffalo, which was nearby, kill the sheriff, and then... So the town of Buffalo is in Johnson County, I think. I'm not actually too sure about that. But anyway, the plan was to capture the town of Buffalo, kill the sheriff of Buffalo, and then kill the rest of the men on the death list. Yeah, sorry, just remembered Buffalo is in Johnson County. So they planned to capture town, kill the sheriff, and then proceed with the death list. So, plans into action. What happened? So, the invaders began by cutting telegraph wires to Johnson County, to cut it off from the outside world. So that's the first thing they did, so that the people living in Johnson County couldn't alert the authorities. They cut off telegraph wires. Then the plan went wrong from there. They were then stopped by the heroic resistance of an individual called Nate Champion, and this here is Nate Champion, this picture. So the invaders were stopped by someone called Nate Champion. After the death of Nate's friend, Nate being short for Nathan by the way, Nick Ray, Nate Champion managed to hold off the invaders all day. So he held them off all day until they finally burnt him out of his cabin. So he was killed by the invaders, Nate Champion. So they were stopped by this individual called Nate Champion after his friend called Nick Ray was killed. So Nate was very heroic and held off the invaders all day until he was finally killed by them. But while Nate Champion was holding off the invaders were actually spotted by passing riders, and by the time that Nate Champion was dead, burned out of his cabin, the alarm had been raised in the town of Buffalo that the invaders were coming to invade the town, so the locals could get ready for the invasion. So what happened? The next day, as the cattle baron and gunfighter invaders approached Buffalo, they heard that local people were armed and ready. They then retreated. So, the invaders were besieged, they were besieged by nearly 300 men until the US cavalry arrived to save the invaders from being killed. So, if you remember, the invaders have a force of 50 men, but the local people in the town of Buffalo, so let's just call them the ranchers, the people against the cattle barons, had a force of 300 men, so the invaders were massively outnumbered and were besieged until the US cavalry had to step in to save them. The invaders were taken into prospective custody. The war ended with 2 people dead and several wounded. The 2 people that died were Nate Champion and Nick Ray, Nate Champion being the man who held off the invaders, and Nick Ray being his friend who was killed earlier. And the cattle barons were actually never convicted for the invasion. However, they never had the same power in Wyoming again, and the homesteaders were able to continue their lives in peace. Whoops. So that's all you need to know about the specific conflict between the homesteaders and the cattle barons, which is the Johnson County War of 1892. Okay, so we've gone through all the knowledge we need to cover for this video today. Here are 4 quick questions based on all this content we've been looking at in today's video. Pause the video here if you wish, have a go at these questions. If not, carry on watching, we'll do them together. Alright, so the answers to the questions. Question 1. In what year did the Johnson County War take place? That was in 1892. What 3 threats to cattle barons had developed by the 1880s? Let's list these. So beef prices falling, homesteaders were settling, and they were settling on land that was claimed by that cattle barons claimed was theirs, and also they were losing cattle to rustlers. They are the 3 threats that developed. Question 3. Who were the first people to be killed by the cattle barons in 1889? So it's Jim Averill and Ella Watson, and those 2 were a couple. Watson was a prostitute, and Jim Averill was a store owner, and he also owned a saloon. Saloon owner. Okay. Question 4. Let's have a look. Who were the gunfighters and cattle barons stopped by? They were stopped by the heroic resistance of Nate Champion after they'd killed his friend Nick Ray. Nate Champion. Alright, there are the answers to these questions. Thanks for watching this video today. Hopefully it's been useful to you. If you have found it useful, please visit the website revisegcsehistory.co.uk, where you can view more revision videos very similar to this one and access a comprehensive range of revision materials. Thanks for watching. See you guys soon.